The rain hadn't let up for hours. It clung to the airport windows like tears that refused to dry. Inside the terminal, beneath flickering lights and announcements that echoed with indifference, a woman sat slouched, her muscles betraying how long they'd been pushed past exhaustion. My Morgan's eyes were dry, but only because her body was too drained to cry. Her back ached. Her socks were damp. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the handle of a fraying suitcase, one she borrowed from a neighbor who had moved out months ago. Beside her sat Ruth, her daughter, holding herself like a soldier. Chin up, backpack zipped, feet swinging just above the ground. She leaned close, nudging her mother's arm with quiet patience. "Mom," Ruth said softly, "why don't you nap for a bit? I'll stay awake for the gate change." Mai shook her head with slow resistance. "No, baby. What if they call us early and we miss it?" "You always say," Ruth replied, mimicking her mother's voice with a grin, "if it's meant for us, it'll wait." That pulled a weak laugh from Mai's throat. She didn't have the energy to argue. 13 hours behind the counter of a noisy cafe, steam burning her wrists, rude customers biting at her patience, aching feet that screamed through her cheap sneakers, and now a delayed red-eye flight with no sign of mercy. Her apron was still tied around her waist. Coffee grounds still clung to the fabric. Her curls, once rich and proud, were tied in a defeated bun, the edges frizzing beneath fluorescent heat. She didn't feel like a woman tonight. She barely felt human. She was just a tired mother, fighting to stay awake in a world that wouldn't slow down for her. Ruth leaned her head on her shoulder. "I'm not sleepy yet," she whispered. "I'm just glad we're going somewhere new." Mai turned toward her daughter and managed to smile. "I'm glad you're here." A voice buzzed over the intercom, cold and robotic, Flight 700, and 13 to JFK, now boarding all first-class passengers. Mai's stomach sank. She looked down at their crumpled economy tickets. They were nowhere near first class. The far back, the budget seats, the kind that made her knees swell and her dignity shrink. Still, she stood slowly, groaning as her legs locked. "Let's go wait in line, sweetie." But just as she moved forward, a voice, a deep, smooth baritone, cut across the noise. "Would you like to board with me?" Mai turned abruptly, startled. The man was tall. Towering, actually. His posture screamed power. He wore a charcoal suit so sharp it made her conscious of the lint on her sleeves. His tie hung loose, like he'd just come from conquering something important. But his eyes, they weren't cold. They were searching. I'm sorry," she stammered. He nodded toward the boarding gate. "You look like you're running on fumes. Let me walk you in. You and your daughter." Mai blinked. "We're not first class." "She's with me," the man said calmly, motioning to the agent without waiting for her to protest. "I'll take responsibility." The airline worker barely blinked, scanning their tickets and motioning them forward. Ben didn't ask again. He simply placed a warm hand on the small of Mai's back, not pressing, just guiding. And before she could summon her pride to decline, she was walking beside him. Ruth followed, wide-eyed, gripping Mai's fingers tightly. They passed the other passengers, the yawners, the laptop typers, the perfume-spritzed elite. Mai felt every pair of eyes crawl across her like she was wearing the wrong shoes at the wrong ball. She didn't belong here. But somehow, she wasn't afraid. The man said nothing until they reached the entrance to the jet bridge. Then, just before stepping onto the ramp, he leaned closer. "You looked like you were about to collapse," he said, not unkindly. "No one should have to fight that alone." She didn't know what to say. He nodded once, then walked forward without waiting for her reply. And that was the beginning, the moment fate stopped making her wait. First class was another planet. The second Mai stepped into the cabin, her jaw locked on instinct. Cream leather recliners stretched out like thrones, soft lighting spilled across gold-lined edges, and the silence. It was the kind you paid for. No crying babies, no elbow wars, no sighs of impatience. Ruth gasped. "Mom, are those real pillows?" Mai gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Don't touch anything." The man, Ben, was already settling into seat 2A. He looked like he belonged here, not just because of the suit, but because of the way he carried stillness. Power didn't drip off him, it hummed beneath his skin. He motioned calmly to the seat beside him. "She can take the window," he said, eyes on Ruth. "You take the middle." Mai hesitated, still clutching her purse like it was armor. I think there's been a misunderstanding. We can't sit here." Ben didn't argue. He simply reached into his blazer, pulled out a slim boarding pass, and handed to the flight attendant. "I upgraded them. No confusion." The attendant gave a tight smile and nodded. "Of course, Mr. Carl. That name. Carl." It registered somewhere in Mai's fogged memory. Headlines, maybe. Magazine covers. Something about acquisitions and tech. But before she could connect the dots, Ruth had already slid into the window seat, her shoes kicking in excitement. "Mom, the screen has games and movies." Mai finally lowered herself into the seat, nerves rattling under her skin. She looked over at Ben, studying his unreadable expression. "I don't understand why you did that," she said softly. He didn't look at her, just closed his eyes for a beat, like choosing his words. "You look like you were holding your breath through life," he said. "I thought you deserved one moment where you could exhale." Mai blinked. "I'm a stranger," she whispered. "You don't know me." Ben finally turned his head, and when his eyes met hers, they weren't cold, they were steady. "Strangers see what friends overlook," he replied. "You were cracking, and no one noticed." She swallowed hard. "I'm not your charity case." "Good," he said simply. "I don't do charity, I do recognition." "And you, miss?" "Mai." "Mai," he repeated, the syllable rolling off his tongue like a secret. "You carry weight like someone who's been lifting for two." "I am," she said. "My daughter and myself." "Then you're stronger than most women I know." She didn't know how to respond to that. So she looked down at her hands, the calloused fingers, the faded nail polish, the bruised cuticle from a busted espresso machine. Ben tilted his head. "What do you do?" "I pour caffeine into people who don't say thank you." His mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "Barista? Professional exhaustion dealer." That earned a low chuckle from him. It was the first time she heard him soften. "And what do you do?" she asked. He paused. "I give people what they think they want until they realize it's not what they need." She arched a brow. "Sounds like heartbreak. Sometimes it's software." That puzzled her. But before she could probe further, the flight attendant came by offering warm towels. Ruth took one, practically bouncing in her seat. Mai accepted hers with uncertainty, like it might vanish if she breathed wrong. Ben watched her, not in a creepy way, not like a man undressing her with his eyes. He looked at her like he was trying to memorize the shape of her fatigue. "You can relax," he said gently. "I'm not used to relaxing around men. I don't know." "You're not relaxing around a man," he said. "You're resting beside peace." That stopped her breath. No one had ever said anything like that to her. The plane began taxiing. The engine hummed to life. Ruth reached out and grabbed her mom's hand. "We're going to New York, Mom." Mai leaned in and kissed her daughter's forehead. "We are." Ben watched the exchange without intruding. But something in his chest shifted. As the plane lifted off the ground, the cabin tilted forward slightly, and Mai leaned back into the leather seat, exhaling deeper than she had in months. Beside her, Ben spoke again. "You know what's interesting?" "What?" "Most people wear exhaustion like a complaint. You wear it like armor." She turned her head, narrowing her eyes. "You always as poetic on planes?" "No," he said. "Only when I meet people who remind me what real looks like." That silenced her again. The seatbelt light blinked off. Ruth eagerly opened her screen, headphones already in her ears. Mai looked at Ben. "I still don't know your name." He extended a hand. "Ben Carl." She shook it. "I knew it sounded familiar." "Don't tell me you read Forbes." "I work 12-hour shifts and take buses. I read expired newspapers people leave behind." He smiled. "Fair." The silence between them was not awkward. It was charged. Warm. Unexpected. Ben reached into the armrest compartment, pulled out 2 glasses, and poured her some sparkling water. "To peace," he said, handing her the glass. She tapped his gently. "To strangers who interrupt breakdowns." And with that, Mai leaned back once more, letting the hum of altitude lull her, just a little closer to sleep. Mai had never been this close to something that didn't feel like struggle. First class wasn't just about extra space. It was the silence, the scented hand towels, the way the seat reclined with a whisper instead of a fight, the way the crew spoke to passengers like they mattered. Ruth was in paradise. Her fingers darted across the touchscreen, discovering movies she'd never seen, games she didn't know existed, and a seat that turned into a bed. She squealed quietly, leaning toward her mother. "This is like a hotel that flies." Mai watched her daughter's delight with a tight throat. Ruth hadn't had much to get excited about lately. She hadn't had a birthday party in 2 years. Most days she wore hand-me-downs 2 sizes off. But here, right now, her child looked like she belonged in the sky. And Mai didn't know how to process that. She sat stiff, her back barely touching the seat cushion, her knees together, hands clenched in her lap. She still hadn't taken her apron off. The coffee-stained cloth now felt like a reminder of who she was, of where she didn't belong. Ben noticed. He didn't speak immediately, just reached into the center console and pulled out a soft blanket. He unfolded it without a word and laid it gently across her lap. She looked down, then up at him, brow furrowed. "You're freezing," he said, not asking. "I'm just overwhelmed." He gave a slow nod. "That's allowed." "I don't know how to act here," she admitted. "There's no script," he replied. "Just breathe." His voice was steady, unhurried, the kind that settled instead of startled. Mai tried to unclench her fists. Slowly, she removed the apron, folded it, and placed it under her seat. Her fingers ran through her curls, trying to tame them. But it didn't matter. They were already frizzed from the storm and hours of fatigue. "You don't have to fix yourself," Ben said quietly. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You looked in the mirror just now," he continued. "Whatever you saw, it doesn't need correcting." Her lips parted, then closed again. That wasn't flirting. It wasn't condescending. It sounded like truth. Ruth leaned over suddenly, pointing to the drink menu. "Mom, they have hot chocolate with cinnamon." Mai smiled, softer now. "You want that?" Ruth nodded eagerly. Ben pressed the service button. When the attendant arrived, he asked for the hot chocolate for Ruth and water for Mai. She tilted her head. "You didn't ask what I wanted?" He shrugged. "You haven't drunk water all night. You need hydration before anything else." She stared at him, unsure whether to feel annoyed or grateful. Somehow, it came off less controlling and more like he'd been paying attention. "I'm not used to people noticing things like that," she said eventually. "You deserve to be noticed," he replied, "for more than just your exhaustion." That stilled her. She turned away, looking out the window where city lights below blinked like scattered promises. Minutes passed. Ruth sipped her hot chocolate, humming under her breath. The cabin lights dimmed. Somewhere to their right, a passenger began to snore lightly. The atmosphere thinned into quiet. Ben sat with one ankle crossed, flipping casually through the in-flight magazine. Not a single glance at his phone. No laptop. No watch checking. He was just, "Here, do you always fly like this?" Mai asked. He nodded. "Often. And you always upgrade random strangers?" "No. Then why me?" He set the magazine down. "Because something about you made me pause." She scoffed lightly. "That sounds like a line." "I don't do lines," he said. "I do instincts. And mine said you needed one night off from surviving." That silenced her again. Her head leaned slightly against the seatback. She fought the weight in her eyelids. It had been fighting her since they left the train station hours ago. "You're afraid to fall asleep," Ben observed. "I don't trust comfort," she replied honestly. He looked at her. Not with pity, but with understanding. "I get that," he said. "Comfort has a cost. And people like us, we've paid in advance too many times." She tilted her head. "People like us? People who carry more than they're supposed to, who give more than they have." His eyes dropped to her hands again. "You're holding the world like you expect it to shatter." "I usually have to catch it when it does," she whispered. "Let it fall tonight," he said. "I'll catch it for you." The plane tilted slightly as they began cruising altitude. Ruth had dozed off, head tilted sideways, soft breaths escaping beneath her blanket. Mai stared at her daughter, then back at the man beside her. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know the look in your eyes," he replied. "What look is that?" "The one that says, I won't break here, not in front of anyone." "But I already did, 10 miles ago." Her chest tightened. Ben leaned back, arms resting on the sides of his seat. "You don't owe me anything," he added. "Not conversation, not explanation. This is your seat for one night. Use it how you need to." Mai let her gaze fall to his hands. Broad, still, not reaching, just resting. He wasn't trying to fix her. He was just making space. For the first time in years, her spine relaxed. Just slightly. Just enough for her shoulder to tilt. Ever so gently. Closer to his. And he didn't move away. At 33,000 feet, silence felt thicker than air. The hum of the engines was a steady lullaby, and the temperature inside the cabin had dropped just enough to pull passengers into their own cocoons. Soft yellow lights glowed above each seat, casting faint halos over bent heads and half-empty glasses. Mai shifted. She hadn't meant to fall asleep. She'd fought it with every inch of resolve, blinking fast, tensing her calves, digging her nails into her palm. She wasn't the kind of woman who fell asleep beside strangers, especially not men, especially not in a place that wasn't hers. But exhaustion was a thief, and warmth? It was a betrayal she hadn't prepared for. Her head dipped, then landed, softly, slowly, against something firm. Ben didn't flinch. His body absorbed the contact like it had been waiting. His arm rested on the armrest still, unmoving, but his shoulder now cradled her temple. Mai stirred once, a faint sigh slipping from her lips, but didn't pull back. Her breathing evened out, and her body slackened in increments. One shoe slid off her heel. Her fingers, curled loosely in her lap, brushed the side of his thigh. Ben looked down. Her curls were frayed and wild, a few strands tickling his neck. Her mouth parted slightly, lips soft, chin tilted upward like she'd surrendered without meaning to. Her chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, the apron string still faintly visible where she'd tucked it away earlier. He could have moved. He could have cleared his throat or shifted just enough to break the spell. But he didn't, because for the first time in what felt like years, someone had leaned on him, not for power, not for gain, not because he had money or connections, but because her body instinctively sought rest. On him, and something about that undid him. Ben turned his head slightly, catching the faint scent of cinnamon and coffee beans in her hair. It was real. Unvarnished. He imagined how many hours she'd stood on her feet, serving others before ending up here. How many nights she'd tucked in her daughter, and then stayed awake budgeting for groceries. His jaw clenched, not out of discomfort, but restraint. He reached up slowly, letting his fingers hover just above the edge of her hairline. One curl slipped between them. Coarse, beautiful, untamed. He touched it, carefully. His fingers grazed it, as if brushing memory itself. Her body stirred again, only slightly. A small sound escaped her lips. Not a word, not a name, just a sound. Soft, vulnerable. Ben closed his eyes. He could feel it now, the tightening in his chest, the twist of something deeper than attraction. Something older than lust. This was intimacy. Before permission, before words, this was presence. He looked past her toward Ruth, still asleep, curled into a perfect ball in her seat. Her small face pressed against the plush pillow. She looked safe. That mattered to him. All of it did. Mai shifted again, and this time, her cheek slid lower, nestling against his chest. Her hand twitched once, brushing his wrist before stilling. Ben's pulse picked up, not because he feared being caught. No one around them cared. Most were already asleep or sunk into movies. No, it was the unfamiliar gravity of being touched with trust. She had given him none of her story, but she had fallen asleep on him like her body had chosen peace without consulting her fear. And that moved him more than he could explain. He remembered the last woman who had ever leaned on him like this, 8 years ago. She had worn red lipstick and never boarded a plane without a list of expectations. She'd loved the idea of him, but not the quiet parts. Not the lonely nights, not the silences between meetings, not the bruises beneath success. Mai didn't ask anything of him. She just needed a shoulder. So he gave it, without asking when she'd take it back. 30 minutes passed. Then another. The cabin lights dimmed further. A soft announcement crackled over the speaker, informing passengers of light turbulence ahead. Mai didn't stir. Even as the plane swayed gently, her body leaned closer, and her fingers, now barely curled, rested against the edge of his seatbelt. Ben leaned down, lowering his chin just above her hair. He didn't press. He didn't dare. But he whispered something, so quietly only he could hear it. "I see you." She didn't respond. But he knew she'd feel it later, somewhere deep in the part of her heart that still believed in softness. Mai stirred. Her lashes fluttered once. Twice, then lifted. She blinked against the cabin lights, which had dimmed to a sleepy amber glow. Her cheek was pressed against something warm, something steady, something breathing. She stiffened. Her eyes widened. She was lying against his chest. Ben's chest. She bolted upright, her hand flying to her lips. Oh God, did I? Ben turned toward her slowly, his posture calm. You needed it. Her cheeks flamed, and she covered her face with both hands. I can't believe You fell asleep, he said plainly, like it wasn't a confession. That's not a crime. I drooled, didn't I? She asked through her fingers. He tilted his head. Only a little. She groaned. Ruth stirred beside them, but didn't wake. Her blanket had slipped to one side, revealing the curve of her small shoulders. Mai gently tucked it back around her, grateful for the distraction. Ben's voice came again, low and even. You looked peaceful. Mai dared a glance at him. His expression wasn't mocking. There was no smugness, no tease. Just observation, and something else, softer. Curious. I haven't slept like that in years, she said quietly. I could tell. She turned toward him fully, crossing one leg over the other. Do you always let random women use you as a pillow? You weren't random, he replied. Oh, you were tired. That's different. Mai studied him. You don't know the first thing about me. Ben didn't flinch. I know what fatigue looks like when it stops pretending. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words didn't come, because he wasn't wrong. And I know, he added, what it feels like to be invisible while everyone else is watching you succeed at falling apart. That caught her off guard. She leaned back, searching his face. You look like someone who's never been invisible a day in his life. Ben exhaled through his nose. You'd be surprised. Mai didn't speak. Not immediately. But her eyes stayed on him, watching the way his fingers curled slightly around the armrest, the way his jaw shifted like he wanted to say more, but had learned not to. You're a strange man, she said at last. He glanced over. Is that good? I don't know yet, she admitted, but it's not unwelcome. They sat like that for a while. The plane sliced through the dark sky, and the world outside the window offered nothing but the deep quiet of clouds. Ben adjusted slightly in his seat. You ever wonder what your life would be if just one moment had gone differently? Mai nodded slowly. All the time. Which moment? She thought for a while. When I said yes to someone I should have said no to. When I chose survival over myself. He leaned his head back. You were young. Too young to know what love isn't. Old enough to believe I deserved less. Ben looked at her, not just with interest, but with respect. I had a ring in my pocket once, he said. Never gave it. Why not? She asked what my net worth was before she said, I love you. That told me everything. Mai winced. Ouch. She said it with a smile, too. Like it was normal. Silence filled the space again. Mai turned toward him fully. And since then, what? No one's touched your heart again? No one's been close enough to try. Until now? Ben didn't answer immediately, but his eyes locked on hers. Let's just say, you surprised me. Mai's throat tightened. He didn't say it like a compliment. He said it like a confession. Ruth shifted again in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Mai looked over, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. She keeps me going, she said. Ben followed her gaze. She seems grounded. She is. Too much, sometimes. She reminds me to hope when I forget how. Ben looked back at Mai. And who reminds you that you matter? Mai paused, then whispered, no one, lately. He reached over, not to touch her, but to place a folded napkin in her hand. It had a single word written in blocky pen strokes, matter. She stared at it. He didn't explain, didn't elaborate, just sat beside her, letting the weight of the words settle between them. Mai held it tightly, and for the first time in a long time, she believed it. Not because someone said it, but because someone saw it. The quiet between them wasn't silence. It was charged, slow, a hum that seemed to move beneath the leather of their seats and ripple along their skin like invisible current. Ben sat with one elbow resting on the armrest, his hand relaxed, his body still facing forward. But his eyes, they hadn't left her, not since she unfolded the napkin and stared at the single word he'd written, matter. That single word now sat in her palm like something too sacred to crumple, too personal to let go of. Mai shifted in her seat, her thigh brushing his. Her breath caught slightly, not from embarrassment, but from awareness. She turned toward him, finally brave enough to ask, "Why now?" Ben's brow dipped. "What do you mean? Why me? Why this flight?" Her voice didn't accuse. It trembled with vulnerability. "Why offer your name, your seat, your shoulder? What are you trying to fix?" "I'm not trying to fix anything," he said. "You're not broken." She gave a soft exhale and looked away, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You say that like it's simple." Ben adjusted his position slightly, now facing her. "You look like someone who's been carrying everyone else's expectations so long. You forgot you had a name before mom, before employee, before resilient." Her eyes glistened, but she blinked fast. "No one's ever looked at me and said that," she murmured. "They saw the strong woman," Ben replied. "But no one asked how tired she was." Her chest rose and fell. Outside the window, clouds drifted below like soft valleys. The moon hung full and low, its light dusting across Ben's cheekbone, sharpening the quiet ache in his expression. He leaned in, not aggressively, not with assumption, just closer, so she could hear his next words like they were meant only for her. "If I kissed you right now," he whispered, "would that make me selfish?" Mai's eyes widened, heart pounding in her ears. She didn't speak. Not right away. But then, with lips barely parted, she answered, "Only if you stop." Ben didn't hesitate. His hand moved first, tracing the curve of her jaw with fingers that didn't rush. His thumb brushed her cheek and then his mouth was on hers. Not hurried, not rough, reverent, like he hadn't kissed in years, like he was remembering how. Mai melted into him without resistance. Her hand found the front of his shirt, curling into the fabric like she needed grounding. The kiss deepened. His palm slid to the nape of her neck, fingers threading through the back of her curls. She tilted her chin, inviting him further. Her lips opened, and their tongues met, slow and exploratory. The cabin might as well have disappeared. No turbulence, no passengers, no airline announcements, just the heat blooming between their mouths, just the pressure of want they'd both been denying. Ben pulled back slightly, breath unsteady, forehead resting against hers. Her lips still tingled. "I don't kiss strangers," she whispered. He smiled against her skin. "Neither do I. But we are strangers. Not anymore." Mai didn't move. She just breathed, deep and slow, trying to anchor herself in this strange new gravity. "Tell me something honest," she said. Ben leaned back enough to look into her eyes. "Anything? Anything. I haven't let a woman this close in a very long time," he said, "because I got used to being wanted for what I could give, not who I am." Mai's hand rose, gently cupping his cheek. "And what do you want now?" He closed his eyes at her touch. "To matter to someone who doesn't care about my last name." "You do." He opened his eyes. "Do what?" "Matter," she said. "To me. Right now." "You matter." Ben exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. He rested his hand over hers, pressing it to his skin, letting the silence absorb everything they weren't saying. Outside, the clouds kept moving. Inside, something shifted, not just between two people, but within them. Because sometimes the most honest connection doesn't start with knowing each other's past. It starts with being seen in the present and choosing not to look away. Somewhere over the Great Lakes, the cabin dimmed to near black. The hush was total, broken only by the occasional clink of ice in a glass or the steady thrum of engines. Ruth slept curled in a crescent shape, her blanket pulled up to her chin. The in-flight screen flickered faintly, paused on a cartoon. Mai hadn't spoken since the kiss. She hadn't needed to. Her body did the talking now, angled toward Ben, breath light, pupils still dilated. She sat with her legs folded beneath her, their shoulders brushing. Her fingers, resting on the shared armrest, slowly inched closer to his. Ben noticed, and without saying a word, he reached beneath the thick comforter draped over their laps, tucked there earlier by a passing attendant, and found her hand. He didn't grip it. He didn't pull. He just let his fingers intertwine with hers. Mai's pulse quickened. She turned slightly, and the blanket shifted, falling across her thighs. Ben leaned closer, his lips brushing her ear. "Cold." She nodded once. He shifted, draping the edge of the comforter farther over her lap, creating a secret space between them, a small, warm world hidden from anyone who might glance their way. His hand left hers, slid slowly across the blanket's edge, and found her knee beneath. Her breath hitched. "Tell me to stop," he whispered. She didn't. Instead, she parted her knees slightly. His hand moved higher, fingers skating up the inside of her thigh, pausing when he reached the seam of her jeans. The metal button was warm from her body heat. He didn't unfasten it yet, just hovered. Mai turned her face, forehead nearly touching his. "Are you sure you want to do this here?" His gaze didn't flinch. "I've never been more certain." She swallowed. He kissed her again, this time slower, lips open, tongue brushing hers like a promise. She melted into him. Her hand slipped beneath the blanket and rested on his thigh, thumb grazing the fine fabric of his tailored slacks. When his fingers finally popped open the button of her jeans, she didn't stop him. She closed her eyes. "Let go." Ben moved with care, unzipping slowly, deliberately. His hand slipped inside, warm and seeking, brushing against the lace of her underwear. He paused there, fingertips teasing the edge. "You're already trembling," he murmured. "I've never done this," she whispered. "Done what?" "Trusted a man in the dark, without needing a reason." He stilled, then kissed her cheek. "You don't need one." His hand slid beneath the lace. She gasped, quiet, breathless. Her hand gripped his wrist instinctively, but she didn't pull away. His fingers explored with precision, finding her warmth, her softness, the proof that she'd been starving for touch, for tenderness. He circled slowly, then pressed, the rhythm just enough to make her hips twitch. Mai pressed her lips together, trying not to moan. His mouth was on her neck now, open, kissing her just beneath the jawline. "No one's looking," he whispered. Her head tilted, offering more. "You're soaking," he added, voice thick with want. "I've barely touched you." She whimpered. He deepened the pressure, sliding one finger inside her. Her breath caught sharp, her nails digging into his arm. "No one's ever touched you like this?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Not like this," she breathed. "Not ever." Ben kissed her again, muffling her gasp, as he curved his finger, then added another. Her thighs quivered beneath the blanket, legs pressing around his wrist, trying to stay quiet as pleasure built like a rising tide. The world outside the window didn't exist. Only her, only now. Her climax crept up fast, caught her mid-breath. She clamped her mouth shut, forehead pressing against his as she shattered in silence. Her body trembled, clenched, then slowly relaxed, melting into the seat like her bones had turned to liquid. Ben kissed her lips gently, still inside her, his fingers slowing. "That," he whispered, "was just the first course." She laughed softly against his mouth. "You're going to ruin me." He kissed her again, with every intention of doing just that. The cabin lights remained low, bathing the aisle in dim golden tones. Somewhere far off, a cart clinked quietly, wheels creaking as a steward repositioned it near the galley. Mai didn't move. Her breathing had slowed, her body still curled subtly toward Ben, their legs touching. Under the blanket, her jeans halfway zipped, skin still warm and humming. She sat quietly in the cocoon of the seat, limbs heavy, lips swollen from kisses that weren't meant to be forgotten. Ben's hand was now resting palm up on his lap, empty but near. She reached for it and laced her fingers through his, squeezing once without speaking. He looked down at their joined hands, then at her. She wasn't smiling, not because she regretted it, but because she didn't know how to explain what she felt. He seemed to understand. "You okay?" he asked softly, voice just above the sound of the engine. She nodded. "I don't think I've let anyone close in years." "You let me." Her fingers tightened around his. "I didn't plan to." Ben's thumb stroked hers gently. "Some things don't ask for permission. They just arrive." That made her glance down, her heart pounding slower now but no less present. "I feel..." She struggled to find the word. "Exposed. Vulnerable?" "No," she whispered. "Seen." Ben leaned closer, resting his head against hers. "There's strength in that." Mai breathed in his scent again, clean, masculine, cedar with a hint of something darker underneath. She wondered if he even knew how intoxicating his stillness was, how rare it felt to be near someone who didn't fill silence with noise. Ruth stirred in her sleep beside them, curling into a tighter ball. Her face was peaceful, unaware of anything shifting just feet away. Mai reached over gently and adjusted the blanket around her daughter. As she did, her eyes brimmed. Ben noticed. "Hey, She wiped the corner of one eye quickly. I don't cry. Not in front of anyone. You're not crying, he said. You're just releasing. That's what crying is. He didn't argue. She leaned back again, brushing her knees together under the blanket, finally adjusting her jeans. The sensation of his touch still lingered between her thighs, but it wasn't just the pleasure that stayed. It was the meaning behind it. He had worshipped, not taken. Asked, not assumed. Held, not used. Her body, long neglected, had responded to kindness like it was oxygen. I forgot what it felt like to want, she said quietly. Without shame. Ben turned his head toward her, expression unreadable but patient. You never needed shame in the first place. Mai exhaled, a low breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. I don't usually trust people, she said. He looked her straight in the eye. Then why me? She hesitated, then said, because you didn't try to convince me. That answer pulled something deep in him, something he didn't show, but she felt in the way his thumb paused its rhythm against her hand. The plane jolted lightly as it hit a patch of rough air. Mai instinctively reached for the seat arm, but Ben steadied her with his other hand, placing it gently on her knee under the blanket. It's just turbulence, he said. Nothing we can't ride through. She nodded, but the words echoed somewhere deeper. Nothing we can't ride through. They sat like that for a while, the only movement being the occasional pressure of fingers and the brush of shared breath. Mai let her head fall back against the seat. Her eyes closed, not from exhaustion this time, but peace. Her world was still filled with uncertainty, delayed paychecks, long shifts, overdue bills. But in this moment, in this slice of sky, she had something rare, stillness, and someone who didn't need her to perform strength to be worth holding. Ben turned his head toward the window. Outside, clouds drifted past like secrets. Inside, nothing needed fixing, because in the aftermath of something intimate and unplanned, they weren't broken. They were just real. The soft chime overhead signaled descent. Passengers began to stir, groggy and stiff, stretching arms and blinking toward the slow return of cabin light. Mai sat upright now, her seatbelt fastened, her curls gently fluffed back, into place, though her body still remembered where his hands had been. Next to her, Ruth yawned and rubbed her eyes. Are we there yet? Almost, Mai said, smoothing the blanket over her daughter's lap. Ben hadn't said much since the turbulence passed, but he hadn't pulled away either. Their fingers had stayed loosely laced until the moment the captain's voice filled the cabin. Then, like synchronized dancers returning to reality, they adjusted their posture. Not distant, just preparing. Mai glanced out the window. A wash of light had started bleeding over the horizon. Early morning, clean and golden, touched the tops of clouds below. We're landing in a few, she said to Ruth, who nodded and reached for a cup of now-cold hot chocolate. Ben turned toward her. You okay? She looked at him, not just at the suit, or the eyes, or the face that somehow seemed more open now. She looked at the man who had let her fall asleep on him, the one who had touched her not out of entitlement, but because she asked with her silence, and he listened. I am, she replied. Good. There was a pause, the kind that asked if this was the end of something or the beginning of something else. Ruth tugged her mom's sleeve. I like him, she whispered, not so quietly. Mai blinked. What? I heard you talking when I was half asleep, Ruth said with a sleepy grin. He made you sound happy. Mai laughed under her breath, brushing a hand across her daughter's hair. You're too observant for your age. Ben smiled at Ruth. I'm glad you think I'm not too weird. You're weird, Ruth said honestly, but in a safe way. Ben looked at Mai. High praise. Mai turned to her daughter. Why don't you get your backpack ready? Ruth nodded and slid off her headphones. Mai faced forward again. She's sharp. I noticed, Ben said. Like her mother. The descent grew more defined now, the engine slowing, flaps adjusting, the plane dipping ever so slightly. I should thank you, Mai said quietly. For everything. You don't have to. I want to. Ben turned his head slightly, watching her profile. You thanked me when you let go. Mai's throat tightened. The seatbelt sign glowed red. The landing gear released. The world tilted just enough to remind her that reality was seconds away. She made me feel like a woman again, Mai said suddenly. Ben didn't respond at first. She looked at him. I mean her, Mai added, nodding toward Ruth. For years it was all about being strong, responsible, unshakable. But last night, she stopped herself. He waited. Mai inhaled. You made me feel something else, something I'd buried. Ben shifted slightly closer. You were never buried, just waiting to be uncovered. She smiled, tired but real. As the wheels kissed the runway, her hand slid across the armrest once more. She didn't reach for his fingers. She simply pressed hers against his, side by side. Not clinging, just acknowledging. The plane taxied toward the terminal in slow, steady motion. Outside the window, ground crew bustled beneath blinking lights, waving orange batons in fluid patterns. The city was still waking up, its skyline barely cutting through the soft morning haze. Inside, passengers stood and shuffled, opening overhead bins, tugging at bags with quiet urgency. Phones lit up. Headphones came off. The transition back to reality was in motion. Mai remained seated, her fingers brushing Ruth's curls as her daughter stretched and yawned. Ben hadn't moved either. He sat with his seatbelt unclipped, one hand resting on his knee, the other loosely curled in his lap. He glanced over at Mai, then at Ruth, then back again, measuring the moment, unsure of its weight until it passed. She caught his gaze. "You'll be okay?" he asked. "Yeah," she said. "We've got a train to catch, then another bus." "You sure?" Mai nodded. He hesitated, then said, "Can I see you again?" She blinked. There it was, the moment, the part where feelings go from accidental to intentional. "Ben." She started, her voice low. "I know," he said quickly. "It's fast. We just met." She tilted her head. "We didn't just meet." "Not really." "Then let me try again," he said. "Mai, I'd like to know you. Off this flight." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes fully. He saw it. She stood slowly, reaching into the seat pocket and pulling out Ruth's sketch pad. A crumpled granola bar wrapper. Her phone, which was still on airplane mode. Ben rose too. Passengers moved past them, edging toward the exit. The flight attendants offered mechanical goodbyes, their voices cheerful but distant. Mai tucked Ruth's belongings into her tote, then turned back to him. She stepped forward, just close enough that their bodies nearly touched. Then, without warning, she rose onto the balls of her feet and pressed her lips to his cheek. It wasn't a lingering kiss. It wasn't rushed either. It was intentional. She let her lips rest there for just long enough that he closed his eyes. When she pulled back, he was watching her like she'd stolen something. "I don't know what that was," she whispered. "But thank you." His throat worked. "Mai, I meant it. I want—" "If it's meant to be," she interrupted gently, "it'll wait." He stared at her. No name, no number, just that sentence. It landed harder than any goodbye. She reached for Ruth's hand and stepped into the aisle, moving with the flow of passengers. She didn't look back. Ben stood there in the empty row, watching until she disappeared down. The jet bridge, her curls bouncing gently, her daughter by her side. He hadn't even asked her last name, but he knew her first like it was etched into something permanent. Mai. He repeated it in his mind. Mai, who carried the world like it weighed nothing. Mai, who trembled beneath his fingers but never asked to be saved. Mai, who left him with silence instead of promises. The line continued to move. Ben finally stepped out of the row, grabbing his briefcase without thinking. And as he entered the aisle, surrounded by strangers, he realized he didn't need her number to remember her. He already couldn't forget. Ben didn't speak to anyone as he exited the terminal. His driver stood at the curb, holding a sign he didn't need. Ben waved it off with a brief nod and slid into the back of the black SUV without a word. The door closed with a soft click. The city greeted him through tinted glass, sharp lines, polished surfaces, nothing out of place. It should have felt like coming home. It didn't. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes. Her name hadn't left his mind once. Mai. The scent of her still clung faintly to his shirt. The way she'd rested against him, the softness of her voice, the fire in her silence, it all played on loop. But it wasn't just what happened between them. It was what had cracked open inside him. A memory, buried, but never far. 7 years earlier. A rooftop in the West Village. A private celebration. String lights. Jazz. And her. Celine. She wore a backless emerald dress and diamond earrings too heavy for the occasion. Her laugh was loud, the kind that turned heads in a room. She'd once told him she loved how he made everything look so easy. That night, he had a box in his pocket. Not because he was certain, but because everyone expected him to be. They stood overlooking the city, champagne in hand, as the skyline shimmered. He reached for the box. Before he could speak, she asked, "Did the quarterly go through?" He froze. She wasn't looking at him. She was checking her reflection in the glass. "I think I broke a nail on that stupid yacht ladder," she added, lifting her hand. Ben lowered the box slowly. When she finally noticed, she laughed. "Oh my God, were you about to—" He didn't answer. Her smile dropped. "Ben, yes, I love you, but let's not make emotional decisions during volatile fiscal periods." That line, it should have been funny. It wasn't. He left the ring on the table that night, never retrieved it. Back in the present, the SUV rolled through the Upper East Side, slowing near his high-rise. Ben didn't move. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight. With Celine, he had been wanted for his portfolio, his assets, his presence at events. But with Mai, he was just a man holding space for a stranger's fatigue. Nothing more, nothing less. He hadn't felt like that in a long time. He hadn't needed to be needed. He had just existed, and it was enough. His phone buzzed. An email. A meeting reminder. A stock update. He turned the screen face down. The driver pulled up to the entrance, glancing into the rearview mirror. "Sir?" Ben didn't respond right away. Then he finally opened the door and stepped out into the morning light. The streets smelled of fresh espresso and pavement. The day had already started for everyone else. But he was still stuck in seat 2A, her head on his shoulder, the whispered truth between them still echoing in his chest. "You matter." He hadn't realized how badly he needed to hear that. From someone who had nothing to gain. And now she was gone. No number, no promise. Just a name that felt like it had weight, and the quiet ache of waiting. The train ride back was quiet. Ruth sat by the window, legs crossed, earbuds in, eyes fixed on passing buildings blurred by speed. Her sketchpad was open on her lap, a cartoonish drawing of an airplane beginning to take form with bold crayon lines. Mai sat beside her, hands wrapped around a lukewarm paper cup of tea she hadn't touched. Her curls had been hastily pinned up again. Her face was bare, no gloss, no distractions. She didn't need a mirror to know she looked different. She could feel it in her skin, in the places he'd touched, in the places he hadn't, in the silence that stretched longer than it used to. Not empty, just still. She wasn't used to stillness. At the next stop, a family boarded, 2 kids and a flustered mother who juggled snacks and apologies. The youngest child dropped a toy car, and Ruth bent down quickly to retrieve it, handing it over with a quiet smile. The mother mouthed a thank you before guiding her kids into the next row. Mai watched it all. The way Ruth moved through the world, thoughtful without being told, steady without being hardened. She was becoming a mirror that reflected things Mai didn't always want to see. "Did you sleep okay last night?" Mai asked gently. Ruth nodded. "Yeah." "Cold?" "No." The blanket was soft. Mai nodded, looking out the window again. A few beats passed before Ruth removed one earbud and turned toward her. "Mom?" "Yeah? Did you like that man on the airplane?" Mai blinked. She turned slowly. "What?" Ruth shrugged. "You were sleeping on him, and then you looked happy when you woke up." Mai opened her mouth, then closed it. She didn't have a prepared answer for this, not for her daughter, not for herself. "He was kind," Mai said finally. Ruth nodded, like she understood more than her age should allow. "You smiled in your sleep." Mai looked at her. "I did? Only once, but I noticed. You don't usually do that." That lodged something in her chest. Ruth adjusted her drawing, switching to a blue crayon. I liked his voice. It was calm. Mai gave a quiet laugh. "You heard him?" "Some. I was pretending to sleep, but I wasn't all the way asleep." Of course, Ruth had always been a light sleeper, and observant, too observant. "Will you see him again?" she asked, not looking up from her page. Mai hesitated. "I don't know," she said softly. Ruth paused in her coloring. "Do you want to?" Mai stared at her daughter, and for the first time since stepping off that plane, she allowed herself to speak the truth. "I think I do." Ruth didn't ask more. She didn't need to. She went back to her drawing, quiet as ever, coloring in the plane's tail wing with small, careful strokes. Mai leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to remember. His voice, his hands, his patience, and that quiet moment, mid-flight, when he made her believe, for the first time in too long, that she was more than someone's tired mother. She was a woman who could still want, and be wanted, even in the sky, even in the in-between, even when she hadn't been looking. 1 week passed, 7 days of alarm clocks, subway transfers, reheated leftovers, and laundry folded in silence. 7 nights of staring at the same crack in the ceiling after Ruth fell asleep, wondering if stillness could echo. Mai hadn't told anyone. Not about him. Not about what happened 30,000 feet above ground. Not about the way her body still tingled when she passed her reflection, catching a glimpse of something softer in her own eyes. She had gone back to the routine like she always did. She clocked in. She smiled at customers. She counted tips. But there was a piece of her that hadn't returned, and she didn't want it to. On Thursday morning, as she sat on a bench near Ruth's school with a worn paperback in her lap and her phone face down beside her, it buzzed once. Then again, she flipped it over. Unknown number. Her fingers froze. She hadn't given him her contact. Not at the airport. Not during the flight. She had walked away with only a kiss and a name. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. Then tapped. I still remember how you taste. Her breath caught. I still remember how your voice sounds when you fall apart. She clutched the phone tighter, heart racing. I don't want to forget. Mai blinked hard. Then, Ben. Her chest rose slowly, then fell. The world around her blurred. The passing jogger, the squeak of swings behind her, the rustle of a leaf rolling across the sidewalk. All she could see was the name. All she could feel was the burn of every memory pouring back in with precision. She didn't respond. Not yet. She stared at the message, thumb hovering again, unsure if pressing reply would feel like surrender or survival. Then another buzz. I'm at gate 14. I bought a ticket I don't need, just to feel close to where it started. Her lips parted. Please come say goodbye, unless you want to start something else instead. Mai's fingers trembled as she read it again. And again. She looked up toward the street, the cabs passing, the sky wide and open. Ruth's laughter echoed from a distance, her voice floating across the playground fence. Mai stood. She turned in the direction of the airport. The same airport where it all began. Where she had boarded alone with nothing but exhaustion and responsibility. Where she had exited a different woman, with no number in her phone, but something undeniable pressed into her soul. She slipped her phone into her pocket, turned toward the playground gate. Ruth looked up as Mai approached. Hey, Mom. Mai crouched to her level. You okay if we go early today? Ruth nodded. Sure. Where are we going? Mai smiled, heart-thudding. Gate 14, she said. To see if fate wants us to board something we didn't plan. Ruth tilted her head, curious. Like a surprise? Mai stood and held out her hand. Something like that. And as Ruth slipped her small fingers into her mother's, neither of them looked back. Ben sat alone at gate 14. No suitcase. No laptop. No boarding pass that mattered. He wore a navy wool coat draped open over a black shirt, slacks sharp enough for a meeting he never intended to attend. A ticket to Chicago lay folded in his breast pocket, just enough of a formality to get past security. The gate was nearly empty. A few travelers slouched against their luggage, heads tilted back in tired poses. The overhead speaker announced a delayed flight to Denver. A child cried somewhere behind him, the sound distant, not intrusive. He tapped his thumb against his knee, checked his phone. Nothing. Then again, he hadn't expected a reply. He'd sent the message because silence had begun to weigh more than distance. He needed her to know that what happened up there wasn't something he left in the clouds. It had landed with him, hard, and now he sat where it began, waiting. There was something both reckless and human in it, waiting without knowing. He stared at the glass wall across from him, where jets taxied like steel beasts, slow and powerful. Somewhere a plane ascended with a roar, disappearing into gray clouds. He remembered the way her head had dropped onto his shoulder, soft and heavy, the kind of surrender that didn't ask for explanation. He remembered her hand beneath the blanket, warm and trembling, fingers tangled with his. And then the kiss. That kiss had never left his mouth. It still lived there, a phantom brushing against memory. The boarding screen blinked with new updates. His flight time shifted. He didn't look up. He wasn't there for a destination. He was there for a question. And if she didn't show, he would carry the answer without complaint, because he'd rather wait and be disappointed than never give her the choice to return. He shifted forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped, closed his eyes, then heard it. The sound of small footsteps, quick and light, then slower ones behind them. He turned his head. Mai stood 10 feet away. No makeup, no costume, no performance, just her. A soft coat over jeans, curls swept into a loose knot, one hand holding Ruth's, the other clutching something tight at her side. Her eyes met his. She didn't smile right away. Neither did he. Time seemed to press pause between them. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. Ruth looked up at her mother. Is this the part where we hug or something? Mai smiled faintly. I think so. Ben stood, but he didn't move toward them. He waited. Mai reached into her coat pocket and pulled something out, a napkin. The same one. She handed it to him, folded into a perfect square. He unfolded it. The word he'd written was still there. Matter. But now, below it, something had been added in neat handwriting. So do you? Ben looked up. Mai's eyes shimmered. No dramatic music, no sweeping declarations. Just quiet recognition between two people who had been waiting their whole lives to be seen. Ruth looked between them and shrugged. So, are we flying somewhere, or what? Ben laughed then, low, deep, honest. Not today, he said. Mai stepped forward. Their fingers touched, then curled. They stood at the gate. But this time, neither of them needed to board, because what they'd come for wasn't in the sky. It was right here. Mai didn't speak right away. Not when he touched her hand. Not when Ruth leaned against her hip and asked if this meant they were getting on another plane. She just stood there, at gate 14, watching the man who had changed everything without asking for anything. Ben. He was more patient than most men she'd met in her life. He didn't reach for her like he was owed something. He waited like she was the one holding the answer, and maybe she was. Her eyes drifted to the glass wall behind him, where the tarmac shimmered under late morning light. Planes moved in slow choreography, some preparing to take off, others coasting gently to their arrival. Arrivals, departures, journeys, returns. She hadn't expected to return to him. She hadn't expected her body to still feel like his hands had memorized it, or that her heart would flutter, not in panic, but recognition. This wasn't a man who wanted to rescue her. This was a man who simply saw her, and that scared her more than anything, because being seen meant she had to stop hiding behind being tired. It meant choosing something for herself. Ben bent slightly to greet Ruth properly. He offered a hand with a nod and said, "Hey, it's good to see you again." Ruth looked up at him, her face unreadable for a beat. Then she shook his hand and said, "You still sound calm." Ben chuckled. "I'll try to keep it that way." Mai watched the exchange and felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not nerves, not dread, something like ease. Not comfort she hadn't earned, but peace she'd let in. "You didn't think I'd come," she said softly when Ruth turned to play with the zippers on her backpack. Ben looked at her. "I hoped." She nodded slowly. "So did I." They stood side by side now, shoulder to shoulder, not facing each other but the gate beyond them. "I'm not here to start something I can't finish," she said after a long pause. "I'm not asking you to," he replied. "I'm asking you to stay long enough to figure out what we're starting." Mai turned toward him fully. "You don't know everything about me. I don't need to. I'm still building my life from scratch. It's messy." Ben took a small step closer. "I'm not afraid of messy." She looked up into his eyes. He hadn't changed. Still composed. Still quiet. Still watching her with that same stillness that made her feel less like a project and more like a person. "Why gate 14? She asked. Ben shrugged. "It was ours." She smiled, almost involuntarily. "It wasn't even our gate that day." "No," he said. "But it's where I remembered you the most." She let that settle. Ruth tugged her sleeve. "Are we going to stand here forever?" Mai laughed, the tension breaking. "No, baby," she said. "We're walking toward something." She turned back to Ben. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded once. "Are you?" She didn't lie. "I'm terrified." He held out his hand again. "Then we go scared." Mai took it, and together they walked, not toward a flight, not toward a plan, not toward a promised future, but toward fate, one step at a time. They didn't leave the airport, not right away. Ben led them to a private lounge, a quiet one, far from the crowd. His name alone opened the doors. No questions asked. Ruth found a corner with juice and a beanbag, headphones back in her ears as she stretched out and got lost in a game. And for the first time since they saw each other again, Mai and Ben were alone. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, watching a plane push back from its gate. She sat on the low leather couch behind him, elbows on her knees, fingers clasped. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was waiting. Ben turned after a moment. "You didn't have to come," he said. Mai looked up. "I know, but you did. I wasn't sure what I'd say. You didn't need to say anything." She stood then, walked toward him, stopped just short of touching. "You made me feel like I could stop pretending," she said. "And then I left before I had to prove that was true." Ben's voice lowered. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, "but I still wanted to come back. Not for a second chance, just a real one." She reached out, fingers brushing his shirt. "You felt like safety," she whispered. "And I didn't know what to do with that." Ben took her hand and brought it to his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath her palm. "You felt like permission," he said, "and I didn't know I needed that either." Mai stepped in closer, their bodies barely separated. He dipped his head until their foreheads touched. No kiss, not yet. Just shared breath, shared heat. Ben's hand slid to the small of her back, gently urging her forward. She didn't resist. Her arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressing to his chest. He held her there, not tightly, just present, like his arms weren't cages. They were space, space she could fill without asking. When she finally pulled back, her eyes met his. They were clearer than before, tired but open. He searched her face. "Are you staying?" he asked. Mai didn't blink. Yes. Ben didn't smile, but his eyes did. She kissed him this time, not tentative, not rushed, not for what had been or what might come, just for now. His arms pulled her closer, his mouth moving with hers, slow and deep, like he was memorizing every angle. The kiss deepened. Her fingers tangled in his shirt. He backed up until the wall caught them, her back pressing against it gently. Her legs parted slightly as his thigh nudged between them. She gasped into his mouth, and he swallowed the sound. They broke only for breath. He looked at her, eyes dark now. "Do you want to leave?" "No." Ben stepped back just enough to take her hand, led her out of the lounge, past strangers, past old gates, past every version of themselves they'd ever tried to outgrow, until they stepped into something neither of them had planned for. Not departure, not arrival. The hotel suite overlooked the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows sheer, drapes pulled halfway open, a muted horizon of steel and quiet light. Ben slid the key card into the door. Mai stood behind him, one hand wrapped gently around Ruth's, the other still, faintly trembling from everything she hadn't yet let herself process. Inside, the suite was warm, neutral tones, soft leather, thick rugs, not opulent, just clean, spacious, safe. Ruth walked in first. Whoa. She dropped her backpack on the nearest armchair and wandered toward the far end, where a second bedroom sat open with twin beds and a view of the clouds. "I like this one," she called out. Mai smiled faintly. "Then it's yours." Ben nodded toward the room. "She'll be comfortable there. There's juice in the minibar, and I had them stock fruit and snacks." Mai glanced at him. "Thank you." He nodded once. "You two deserve to rest without feeling small." Ruth settled quickly, already pulling out her tablet and curling beneath a throw blanket. Mai stepped back into the main suite. Ben stood by the window, coat now off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked over as she walked toward him. "I should feel strange about this," she said. "Do you?" "No." She stood a few feet away. "I'm not here for a night," she said. "Not if this is only about bodies." "It's not," he said immediately. "I've spent most of my life being useful, needed, rarely chosen." Ben's jaw worked as if holding back something sharper than a reply. Then he crossed the distance between them and stopped just short of touching her. "Then let this be about choosing," he said. "No need, no debt, just want She exhaled. He reached for her hand and brought it to his chest. "Come here," he said gently. She let him guide her. Their lips met again, softer this time, but no less certain. His hands cradled her face like he wasn't trying to hold her down but lift something out of her. She reached up, arms wrapping around his neck, standing on the tips of her toes to deepen the kiss. When she pulled away, breathless, she didn't speak. She just nodded once. Ben led her to the bedroom, slowly, like every step was something sacred. He closed the door behind them. The sound was soft but final, not of hiding, but claiming privacy. The room was dim, sun bleeding in from the side. The bed was wide, crisp white sheets untouched. He kissed her again, longer this time. His hands found her waist, sliding beneath her coat, pushing it from her shoulders. Mai shrugged it off and let it fall. Her arms were bare beneath, a soft tank top hugging the curve of her. He stepped back to look at her fully. She didn't cover herself, didn't shy away. She just met his eyes. Ben reached for the hem of her shirt and raised it, waiting for permission. She lifted her arms. The shirt fell. He took her in with reverence, not hunger. She reached for his shirt next, unbuttoning slowly, eyes on the smooth line of his chest, the sharp slope of his shoulders. The fabric slid to the floor. His skin was warm. He kissed her collarbone, the dip of her shoulder, the swell beneath her jaw. She moaned softly, her fingers sliding down his back, pulling him closer. Clothing melted away, one layer at a time. Socks, jeans, underthings. She wasn't perfect, not airbrushed, not molded by expectation, but she was beautiful in the way trees survive storms. Still standing, still full of life. Ben touched her as if honoring every inch. He kissed the soft dip of her stomach, the stretch marks at her hips, the hollow at the base of her throat. "You don't need to be held together here," he whispered against her skin. She guided him back to her mouth. Then, to the bed. They moved slowly at first, learning, feeling, matching rhythm to breath, breath to want. He entered her with care, eyes open, mouth against her cheek. She gasped and clung to him, not in desperation but in belonging. Each movement built like quiet thunder, not loud but deep. His mouth found her shoulder as her hips lifted to meet him. They weren't rushing, they were remembering. She called his name, not because it hurt, but because she finally knew what it felt like to be wanted without being used. He whispered hers into her neck. They came undone together, not in pieces, but in release. When they collapsed into the sheets, tangled and warm, neither reached for words. They didn't need them. What had just happened had no explanation, only truth. The room was still. Only their breaths filled the silence, heavy, tangled, satisfied. Sheets half pulled across them, skin against skin, hearts sinking again and again without needing rhythm. Mai lay on her back, one leg draped over Ben's thigh, her arm folded beneath her head. Her curls spilled across the pillow like they had finally exhaled with her. Ben hovered just above, propped on an elbow, tracing the line between her navel and hip bone with the back of his knuckles. She didn't flinch. She didn't fold into herself like she usually did. She let him look, let him linger, and for once didn't rush to cover the stretch, the curve, the softness that motherhood had carved into her body. "You keep staring," she said, voice low, lips barely parted. "You keep letting me," he replied. His fingers dipped lower, circling lazily at the edge of her thigh, right above where the blanket barely covered her. She arched slightly, responding without asking. Her body, now so familiar with his, moved without fear. "You ever been touched like this before?" he asked, whispering the question as his palms smoothed down between her legs, gentle but deliberate. Her eyes locked on his. Not even close. He parted her legs again, slid 2 fingers through her warmth, teasing slowly, light at first, then firmer as he felt her open again beneath his touch. "You're already wet," he murmured. "I never stopped being," she said, gasping as he slid back inside her. He leaned down, lips brushing her ear. "You're not used to being worshipped. I'm not used to being noticed. You were never invisible." His voice rumbled through her chest. She lifted her hips, pushing into his hand, chasing the friction. He curved his fingers, just right, and kissed the underside of her jaw. "I want you again," he said, voice like velvet against her throat. But slower this time. "Then take me slowly," she whispered. Ben pulled his hand away, brought it to his mouth, and tasted her. Mai's thighs quivered at the sight. He kissed his way down, neck, collarbone, sternum, taking his time. His tongue circled one nipple, then the other, sucking gently until she squirmed. He held her hips still and went lower. When his mouth reached the space between her thighs, she didn't brace. She surrendered. He kissed her there, full, open-mouthed, with intention, licked slowly, deeply, savoring every reaction, every tremor. She gasped, then cried out softly, one hand gripping the sheets, the other buried in his hair, anchoring herself to the only thing that made sense now. Him. He hummed against her, tongue flicking rhythmically, fingers digging into her thighs to keep her wide for him. She came undone again, body arching off the bed, hips bucking. Her climax wasn't polite. It was fierce. Her moan was raw, mouth open, chest heaving. Ben kissed up her belly, over her breastbone, until he reached her lips again. She tasted herself on his tongue and didn't pull away. She kissed him harder, pulled him on top of her. "No teasing," she said, voice thick with lust. "I want you inside me." "Say it again," he said, teasing her entrance with the tip of him. "I want you," she said breathlessly, wrapping her legs around his waist. Now, he slid in with one long stroke. Her mouth fell open. "Ben." His name cracked from her lips like a prayer. He stilled, buried deep. "I want you to feel how full you make me," she whispered against his ear. He thrust slowly at first, watching every flicker of pleasure on her face. Her eyes closed. Her body rose to meet his. Each movement became a promise. No rush, no performance, only need, and the answer to it. She rolled her hips, pulling him deeper, gasping into his neck. He reached beneath her, lifting her slightly, hitting angles no one had before. Her moans became shorter, quicker, higher. She was close again. So was he. He buried his face in her neck. "Don't hold back." She didn't. She cried out, coming hard, shaking beneath him. Her nails raked down his back. He followed, groaning low, deep, releasing everything into her, like his body had been waiting years for this kind of surrender. They collapsed together, tangled, breathless. Minutes passed. Their hearts slowed, but the feeling didn't fade. Mai ran her fingers across his chest. "You didn't just take off my clothes," she whispered. Ben looked at her, brow soft. "What did I take off?" She kissed his collarbone. "My armor." Moonlight spilled in through the sheer curtains. The sheets were a mess, twisted, damp, draped halfway over Mai's leg as she lay sideways across the bed. Her skin glowed in the pale light, warm from his touch, flushed from what had just happened. Ben watched her, naked, unapologetic, curled against his chest, her breathing steadying slowly, like her body had finally found a rhythm outside survival. He kissed her shoulder. She didn't flinch. She leaned into it. "You keep doing that," she murmured. "Doing what?" "Kissing me like you're memorizing me." "I am." Mai tilted her head back, meeting his eyes. He looked at her like she wasn't just a body, but something sacred, something unrushed, something he didn't want to escape from when morning came. "You weren't supposed to be this gentle," she whispered. He kissed her temple. "You weren't supposed to tremble like that and make me fall apart." She climbed over him, slow and deliberate, straddling his waist. Her hair spilled forward, framing her face as her thighs settled against his hips. "I'm not done," she said, voice low. Ben's hands slid up her legs, stopping at her hips. "You're insatiable." "I'm awake now," she breathed. He lifted his head, met her halfway. Their mouths crashed again, hungrier this time, lips bruising with how much they wanted to consume, not devour. Her hips rolled forward, teasing him beneath her. He groaned. "Mai." "Shh." She reached between them, wrapped her fingers around him. He pulsed in her hand, hard and hot, and she didn't hesitate. She guided him into her, slow, thick, full. They both gasped. She sank onto him, inch by inch, her body swallowing him with a stretch that burned in all the right ways. Her head fell forward. His hands gripped her thighs. "Look at me," he said. She did, and as she began to move, hips rolling, steady, deliberate, he never took his eyes off her. It wasn't rushed. She rode him like she was claiming him, grinding slow, moaning into his mouth when he sat up and wrapped his arms around her back. Their bodies stuck together, chest to chest, her nipples brushing his skin as they rocked in unison. He kissed her neck, her shoulder, the hollow behind her ear, "You feel like fire," he growled against her skin. "You feel like home," she moaned. She moved faster now, bouncing, grinding, chasing her second release with no shame. He reached between them and pressed his thumb against her, rubbing in tight circles. She screamed, clenched, fell apart on top of him, her body convulsing, mouth open, no sound coming out but breath and disbelief. He followed right after, thrusting up into her as she collapsed into his chest. His release flooding into her with a groan that sounded like surrender. They clung to each other, panting, trembling. Neither of them spoke for a while. When Mai finally looked up, her cheeks were damp. "Was it too much?" he asked softly. She shook her head. It was too right. Ben brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You okay? I've never felt more alive." He kissed her again. Slower, tender now. When they finally pulled away, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I thought I knew what desire was," she whispered. He ran his fingers down her spine. "You do now." She smiled against his skin. And in that moment, naked, tangled, breathless, they weren't two people escaping reality. They were two people finally meeting it. Together. The clock on the nightstand blinked 2:47 a.m. But time felt irrelevant. The room was quiet except for the hum of the city outside the window and the soft breaths rising and falling beneath the covers. Mai lay on her side, facing Ben, one hand resting on his chest, her fingers lazily, tracing slow, absent-minded circles around the faint scar near his collarbone. His arm was tucked beneath her neck, the other draped across her waist, holding her like he had no plans of letting go. Neither of them had said anything in a while, but nothing about the silence felt empty. He broke it first. "You always sleep this lightly?" "I always sleep like I'm waiting for something to go wrong." Ben turned his head on the pillow, kissed her forehead. "What are you waiting for now?" She thought about it for a moment, then answered, "I don't know, maybe, that you'll disappear, that I imagine this, that I'll wake up on a hard plastic airport seat and none of this happened." He ran his fingers through her curls. "Does this feel imagined?" She pressed her palm flat against his chest. "No, but I've learned not to trust what feels good." Ben didn't speak immediately. He just pulled her closer until her thigh slid over his and they were tangled again. She whispered, "It feels dangerous to be held like this." "Why?" "Because you might mean it." "I do." The room fell quiet again. She inhaled, slow and shaky. "I haven't let anyone this close in a long time. I stopped letting myself hope for real things, kept everything practical, manageable, and now?" Her voice dropped. "Now I'm scared." Ben didn't flinch. "So am I." That surprised her. She lifted her head, chin resting on his chest. "You?" He nodded slowly. "You think being successful makes it easier to give your heart away? It doesn't. It just makes it harder to believe someone wants the heart and not the empire it's attached to." She searched his eyes. "Is that what happened before? I almost married someone once. She loved the idea of me, the access, the status, but not the quiet, not the guilt, not the sleeplessness, not the need to be seen. And now?" Ben's voice lowered. "Now I want the mess. I want the parts people skip, the mornings with bed hair and unbrushed teeth, the small arguments, the silence after long days, the version of a woman that doesn't come curated." Mai blinked back sudden warmth behind her eyes. He added, "And if that version of you wants to fall asleep in my arms every night, I'd be the luckiest man I know." She leaned up and kissed him. Not urgently, not even hungrily, just meaningfully. She pulled back, her voice barely audible. "You make me feel like I don't have to earn softness." "You don't," he said. She rested her forehead against his. "And what about tomorrow?" "We'll figure it out," Ben said, "one morning at a time." Mai smiled, then rolled on top of him again, slow and fluid. "Not yet," she whispered. "Let's not land just yet." And as their bodies found each other once more, it was no longer about pleasure or even desire. It was about staying in that fragile, beautiful in-between space, where nothing had to be planned, where nothing had to be perfect, where love didn't arrive loudly, but stayed quietly, like breath. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden wash over the room through the slightly parted curtains. The city was still waking, but inside the suite, everything was still. Mai opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The sheets were softer than anything she remembered owning. The air smelled like him, cedarwood, citrus, and something deeply masculine. And then, The warmth behind her reminded her exactly where she was. Ben. His chest was pressed against her back, one arm wrapped securely around her waist. She hadn't moved all night. Neither had he. It was the first full sleep she'd had in years. She lay still for a while, taking it in. No alarms, no crying child, no pressure to rush anywhere. Just quiet, just safety, just the quiet hum of a life she'd never imagined possible. She turned slowly in his arms. Ben stirred, but didn't open his eyes. "Good morning." His voice was husky, half asleep, and entirely too intimate. It made something flutter in her chest. "Morning," she whispered. He opened one eye. "You stayed." "I wasn't going to," she said softly. "But I couldn't leave." His hand moved to her cheek, thumb tracing a lazy path over her skin. "I didn't want you to." She smiled faintly. They lay like that, staring at each other in the filtered light, until her stomach growled. Ben chuckled. "That's the first time I've heard your stomach louder than your words." Mai blushed. "I forgot dinner." He sat up slightly, pulling her up with him. "Room service. Anything you want." "You mean I don't have to cook?" "Only if you want to wear nothing but an apron and distract me in the kitchen." She nudged him playfully. "Tempting." Ben brushed his lips against her hairline. "You don't have to earn your stay here, Mai. You've already been through enough." That stopped her smile. She lowered her gaze. "It's hard to believe this is real. That someone like you would want someone like me." Ben reached under her chin and lifted it gently. "What exactly do you think you are?" "Complicated. A mother, scarred, not exactly a perfect fit for your life. And what exactly do you think my life is?" he said, voice quiet but firm. "You think it's perfect because it looks polished on the outside? I've got a boardroom full of people who know how to nod, and a house so quiet it echoes. I've had dinner with women who complimented my success but never asked if I was lonely." He looked at her with such raw honesty it made her breath catch. "You are the first woman," he continued, "who didn't try to sell me a version of herself. You showed up exhausted, honest, real, and you made me want to stay awake just to hold you." Mai's eyes welled up, uninvited. Ben wiped the tear that slipped down her cheek. "Don't cry." "I don't mean to," she whispered. "I know. That's why it matters." They sat up in bed, backs against the headboard, his arm over her shoulder as she curled into him. The tray came eventually, pancakes, fruit, coffee, but neither of them rushed to eat. They fed each other pieces between smiles, between questions, between long pauses where words weren't needed. She asked about his childhood. He asked about Ruth. She asked what scared him. He said, waking up and realizing I'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life. Then he turned the question on her. "What about you? What scares you most?" Mai didn't hesitate. "That this is just a dream I don't get to keep." Ben set his coffee down and turned toward her, his voice low. "Then let's make it real. Day by day, no pressure, no timeline, just us." She looked down at their hands, intertwined without trying, and nodded. For once, she wasn't thinking about escape plans. She wasn't thinking about pain. She wasn't even thinking about how long this would last. She was just here, with him, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Ben stood alone at the window, coffee in hand, watching the light ripple across the city skyline. Mai was still curled in the bed behind him, her breathing soft, rhythmic, safe, but in his chest, the silence wasn't quite as still. He closed his eyes, and just like that, he was no longer in this hotel suite. He was 8 years old, sitting at a long walnut dining table in his childhood home, trying not to cry in front of his father. The man's voice had been like ice. "You're a Woods. Woodsmen don't cry. You got pushed down. Push harder next time. And for heaven's sake, stand up straight." Ben had sniffled, wiped his face with the sleeve of his prep school uniform. His mother had said nothing, just sat there at the head of the table, cutting into her salmon like her son's pain was background noise. Later that night, in his room, he'd curled up with his pillow and whispered into it, "Maybe if I just stop feeling things, they'll be proud of me." That whisper had stayed with him. For years, Ben blinked back to the present. He rubbed his jaw, now grown and square, no longer the soft round face of a boy. But some echoes didn't age. He thought about how often he'd been rewarded for being cold. In the boardroom, at investor summits, during corporate wars, ruthlessness was respected. Disconnection was expected. He'd built a company that mirrored his childhood, impressive from the outside, emotionally bankrupt on the inside. Until last night. Until that moment Mai fell asleep in his arms, not needing anything from him except a place to be still. She hadn't begged for love, hadn't tried to seduce power. She simply existed. And in her existence he saw everything he never had: softness without fear, honesty without shame, emotion without apology. A memory hit him then. Harvard, his junior year. The girl he dated secretly, Samantha, studied literature, walked barefoot on the quad. She once cried during a poem reading. He had pulled back from her afterward, ghosted her. Why? Because it embarrassed him. Not her tears, his reaction to them. He'd felt something, and instead of sitting with it, he'd punish her for making him feel. He whispered aloud now, "I was trained not to love anything that couldn't be controlled." Mai stirred behind him. He turned. She was watching him. "You okay?" she asked, sitting up, hugging the sheets to her chest. Ben nodded. "Yeah, just remembering things I used to avoid." She tilted her head. "Want to talk about it?" He walked to the bed and sat beside her, handing her the untouched second cup of coffee. "My father thought emotions were a disease. My mother made elegance look like silence. I used to think power meant never breaking down. And now," she asked gently, "I think power is staying when everything in you wants to run. Power is feeling things anyway, even if it breaks you." Mai didn't speak. She just reached over and took his hand, threading her fingers through his. He squeezed back. Ben exhaled slowly. "I used to look for perfection, women who said the right thing, wore the right dress, knew how to keep the mystery. And they never saw me, not once. They loved the company. They tolerated the man." Mai was quiet for a while. Then softly, "And what do you want now?" He looked straight at her. Someone who cries when she's tired, laughs when she shouldn't. Someone who's been through storms but still stands. Someone who lets me in, even when it scares her. She looked down, touched. "You're describing someone like me." "I'm describing exactly you." Mai smiled, but there was something uncertain in her eyes. "I'm not always easy to hold." Ben nodded. "Then let me learn. Let me fail. Let me try again." Silence settled over the room, but this time it was comforting. He continued, voice softer, "I don't want perfect anymore. I want real, because real stays." And with those words, the air between them shifted. Not dramatically, not with sparks, but like a curtain lifting, like something heavy had been laid down. Mai leaned her head on his shoulder. Ben rested his cheek on her hair. He whispered, "I'm not afraid of your shadows. I've just been waiting for someone who could sit with mine." Outside, the city came alive with noise. But in here, they weren't rushing to join it. They were busy rewriting definitions of strength, of love, of who they were allowed to be, together. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Ben knocked gently on the door of Mai's apartment. He wasn't in a suit, no polished mask, no billionaire armor, just jeans, a soft navy sweater, and the kind of nervousness only someone who finally meant it could wear. The door creaked open. Ruth stood there. Ben froze. She was smaller up close than he'd imagined, but her eyes, wide and still, were her mother's, dark and steady. She didn't speak, just tilted her head, examining him like a puzzle she wasn't sure how to solve. Ben cleared his throat. "Hi, you must be Ruth." She didn't blink. "You're the man from the plane." "Yes," he said, kneeling slightly so they were closer in height. "That was the first time I saw your mom, and maybe the first time in a long time I really saw anything at all." Ruth squinted. "You looked scared that day." Ben smiled. "I was. Why? Because when something real shows up in your life, it shakes everything that's fake. And I had a lot of fake things before I met your mom." Ruth stared at him for a moment longer, then stepped aside. "She's in the kitchen." He rose, heart pounding, and walked through the doorway. The space was small, cozy, lived in. A fridge covered in school art and sticky notes. A couch with a throw blanket that had clearly been washed 100 times. It was the opposite of everything he'd built, and he'd never felt more at home. Mai stood at the stove, pouring hot water over tea leaves. Her back stiffened slightly as she felt him behind her. "You're early," she said without turning. "I couldn't wait," Ben replied, voice low. She turned around, arms folded loosely. Her eyes searched his face. "What changed?" she asked. "Last night, you looked like you were going to say something. Then you left. I was afraid I'd ruin it." "Ruin what?" "This," he said, stepping closer. "Whatever this is, could be." Mai looked at him, guarded. "Say what you came to say, Ben." He nodded, swallowed. "I grew up believing that love was something you controlled, that you measured it by how much someone didn't need you. But that's not love. That's distance dressed up as dignity." He took another step. "I've lived my life surrounded by people who needed what I could give, but never needed me. And that's what you changed. You didn't ask for anything but truth, and you gave more of yourself than anyone ever has." Mai blinked, emotion quietly rising, but she said nothing. Ben continued. "You told me once that you were scared this was a dream you didn't get to keep. I'm here to tell you, I want to fight for that dream. I want to wake up beside you and know I'm not pretending anymore. That this, us, is the one thing in my life I didn't earn with money or influence." She lowered her eyes. "Ben, I know I can't erase the pain. I know you've carried Ruth alone. I know you've been the provider, the protector, the everything. And I won't insult you by saying I can just walk in and fix it." His voice cracked. "But I can stay." Mai looked up, startled by the word. "I can stay when the bills are late. I can stay when Ruth throws a tantrum. I can stay when you doubt yourself and cry into a pillow at 2 a.m. I can stay when it's boring or messy or real." He took her hand then, slowly, like asking permission. "I don't want to let you go again. Not because I'm lonely, not because I feel guilty, but because when I met you, I finally met myself." Her fingers tightened in his. The silence stretched, full of tremors and memories and moments. Then a small voice broke it. "I think he's telling the truth," Ruth said from the hallway, still clutching her favorite stuffed animal. Mai turned, surprised. Ruth walked slowly into the room. "Mom, you always said love is when someone shows up, even if they don't have to." Mai's throat tightened. Ben looked at Ruth, heart in his throat. "I don't have to," he said softly. "But I want to." Ruth nodded solemnly. "Then you should stay." She crossed the room and sat on the arm of the couch, legs swinging, face calm. Mai looked at her daughter, her fierce little judge of character, and then at the man before her. She exhaled. "What are you offering, Ben? A relationship? A weekend romance? A maybe we'll see?" "I'm offering the kind of love that shows up with groceries. That fixes the leaky faucet. That learns how to braid hair if Ruth asks." She arched an eyebrow. "You'd braid her hair?" "I'd YouTube it. Every day until I got it right." A laugh broke out of her before she could stop it. It wasn't the kind of laughter that filled silence. It was the kind that cracked through fear. She stepped forward, arms sliding around his waist. His arms wrapped around her like memory, like promise. "I don't need a perfect man," she whispered. "Good," he said, kissing her forehead, "because I only know how to be yours." They stood there for a long while. No headlines. No deals. Just a man, a woman, and a girl who had finally seen someone mean what he said. Ruth picked up her drawing pad and started sketching again. Outside, the morning was unfolding like a new chapter. And inside, a family, unfinished, unpolished but real, had taken its first unshakable step. The day was still young, yet the air at the terminal already carried that low murmur of parting and arrival, of promises packed into suitcases, of stories beginning before the engines ever roared. Ben Carl stood just inside the glass doors, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a simple brown envelope. He wore no tie, no showy watch, just the quiet intensity of a man who had peeled off every layer but truth. He waited, and then he saw her. Mai emerged from the crowd, holding Ruth's hand, their small roller bag clicking over the tiled floor. Her face was unreadable, but her pace didn't slow. Ben stepped forward. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come." Mai lifted her chin. "I almost didn't." Ruth was the one who answered more softly. "I told her you'd be here." Ben knelt, but not for a proposal, not for fanfare. Just as a man, fully present, about to ask the scariest and most honest thing he'd ever asked in his life. He pulled the brown envelope out and held it up. "Inside this is a plane ticket. It's in your name, first class, same flight as mine. The same one I boarded alone the day I met you." He looked up, eyes fixed on Mai's. "But this time, I don't want to leave without you." Mai's breath hitched. Ben continued. This isn't about sweeping you off to Paris or spoiling you with private jets. This is about choosing the unknown, together. Not with a map, but with each other. Mai looked down at the envelope, then back to him. No ring? Not yet, he said softly. Because what I'm asking for is bigger than a proposal. He stood, slowly. I'm asking you to come with me, not just physically, but emotionally. I want us to build something we didn't plan for. Something raw and flawed and beautifully real. Not a fairy tale, a foundation. Mai bit her lip, eyes stinging. And Ruth? She asked. Ben turned to the little girl. I've got a window seat for her, same row as us. But if she prefers the aisle, we'll trade. I want her comfort to be part of this too. Ruth smiled faintly, clearly understanding more than a child her age should, but not afraid. Ben turned back to Mai. I don't want to be a chapter in your life. I want to help you write the next ones. If that means carrying bags, making pancakes badly, walking beside you at school drop-offs, I'm in. Mai looked at the envelope in his hand. She didn't take it immediately. What if we don't make it? She asked. What if we crash and burn? Ben's voice was steady. Then we'll burn holding each other, and we'll rise again. There was a long pause. Then slowly, tenderly, she reached out and took the envelope. She didn't smile. Not at first. She simply exhaled, like someone who had been holding her breath for years. All right, she whispered. Let's see where this flight goes. Ruth clapped. Ben's laugh was low and grateful. As they made their way toward the boarding gate together, there was no dramatic music, no flashbulbs, just the soft, rhythmic click of their wheels moving in sync. At the checkpoint, Ben let Mai and Ruth step ahead. He watched them with the kind of reverence reserved for rare art or sacred things. And when he stepped through security behind them, something invisible shifted. He was no longer a man running from pressure or loneliness. He was a man walking toward a future that asked for his heart, not his money. As they reached the gate, the agent looked up. 3 for seat, 3A, 3 billions, and 3C. Mai nodded. Ruth grinned. Window seat's mine. Ben leaned close. It always was. The jet bridge stretched ahead of them, but it no longer looked like a tunnel of routine. It looked like a second chance. As they stepped through, shoulder to shoulder, Ben whispered to Mai, I was scared, the first time, you sleeping on me, your warmth. It made me want things I didn't have a name for. She turned her head slightly. And now? He smiled. Now I want to build the things we don't even have dreams for yet. Mai didn't reply with words. She just reached out and took his hand. Tightly. And they boarded, this time not as strangers, but as something much rarer. 2 people brave enough to begin again. Together. The plane leveled in the sky. Clouds drifted below like soft memories, half forgotten, but still gentle enough to hold. Mai glanced over at Ben. He wasn't looking at her, he was watching Ruth. The little girl had fallen asleep mid-sentence, headphones still clinging to her curls, her cheeks flushed with that pure kind of peace only children carry. And Ben? He didn't speak, but the way he watched her, like he was seeing a new sunrise, like he was catching up on years he never knew he'd missed. Mai leaned back into her seat, her head gently resting against Ben's shoulder, familiar now, but never boring. A place, not just for rest, but for return. The engines hummed. The sky outside remained unbothered by how everything had changed in the span of a day, but inside seat 3 billions? Everything was different. She wasn't running anymore, not from exhaustion, not from hope, not from herself. Ben reached over and gently laced his fingers with hers. Not for show, not for display. Just presence, just promise. Later, long after the wheels touched down in a city that neither of them called home, but maybe could, Mai sat on a hotel balcony with a glass of tea in her hands. Ruth was asleep in the adjoining room. Ben stepped out and wrapped a soft blanket around her shoulders before sinking into the seat beside her. They watched the city blink under the evening sky. No grand declarations, no urgent rush, just steady breathing, quiet rhythm, time, finally, slowing to their pace, and somewhere in that shared silence, Mai smiled. Not because she had it all figured out, not because her heart wasn't still healing, but because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone in the process. Sometimes life delays you, makes you miss a flight, a moment, a plan. You think it's punishment. You think it's failure. You think it's just another disappointment in a long list of almosts. But what if that delay was divine? What if the exhaustion that made you sit down was the beginning of someone else standing up? What if being tired was the only way love could find you when your defenses were finally down? Sometimes life reroutes you, not because you're lost, but because love was waiting in the delay. If you've ever found something unexpected in your most tired moment, comment below. Love came when I needed rest. Like, share, and subscribe to Love and Twilights, where we turn delays into destinies.